Oh, it is. So, my imposter syndrome right now. Active at 5, 4, 3, 2. We got some people on Zoom and more people coming in. Good afternoon, everybody. I was just joking with Lydia. She said that the clock's a little slow. We can go ahead and start. And I said, so my own imposter syndrome can kick it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Hi. My name is Lisa Laughlin, and I work across the street in the Employee Assistance Program, which is also the Office for the Health for You program. So I work in both programs. I actually created that second job, but forgot to give myself a second paycheck. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But in my role as an emotional wellness consultant, I get to spend time talking with people about issues that we typically talk about in counseling settings, but get to come out to places to talk about it in a more educational way. So I'm super grateful to be here today with two of my 3 co-planning partners. This whole imposter syndrome event that happened last week, is that just last week? 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, a few weeks ago. Was created because the folks who put together the Academic Women's Forum were thinking about what topics we wanted to do for the upcoming year, and it's been kind of a consistent theme that this is something that maybe we want to talk about. And then Matt actually provided awesome leadership to get a nationally recognized speaker to come to campus. That same group, when we were talking about the event and people started to register, I guess it was primarily my voice that started with, like, if we have a day where people get to hear about this. Some of us have known we've had imposter syndrome for a long time. Some of us may just be hearing those words for the first time. And I remember when I first heard them, it was kind of a startling moment. Like, it so described what my experience had been, which had been unnamed for so long, that it really sort of shook me. And I said, if we're going to have a day where people get to maybe understand that that's something that's happening for them, we should probably provide some kind of follow-up class. And so we put together this 4-week class, which is designed to be a follow-up to Dr. Young's visit. I'm just curious with people in the room, how many of you were engaged in Dr. Young's visit one way or another? So, okay, so the assumption that most people will have been at that event. We didn't really advertise this class very many other ways, so I am operating under the assumption that people were at one of the 3 sessions that we had. We had close to 500 people, all said and done, throughout the day attend events on campus that Dr. Young facilitated. I'm going to do a little bit of an intro in case you're brand new, you heard about it some other way, and you want to kind of know what it's about. We'll talk a little bit about that. But the emphasis for the class is really kind of on some ways to break free of it. There have been times in my life where I understood enough about how I got, how I got to a place. Like, I could tell you what I was feeling and how that happened in my childhood, but that didn't necessarily help me know how to transcend it. And so we wanted the class to be the start of starting to recognize how to break free from this pattern. So, but to go back, so I do want to thank Lydia and Matt and Cindy from the Academic Advancement Network, Lydia from the Work Life Office, and Matt from the Graduate Student Life and Wellness Program for being partners with us in this. But I do want the learning objectives to be to go ahead and define it. What is it? What are we talking about here? We'll do a little bit of that today. And then also, one of the things that matters to me most about this is that for more of us to be willing to say, this is a pattern of thought I get into sometimes, and it impacts me. It's part of my story. When we don't let people know that we're experiencing something, they can't help us. They can't be there and be supportive of us. The other thing that happens is there are things that a great many of us experience, but because there's shame around it and nobody wants to let anybody know that it's happening, we don't say it out loud. And then people who are having it don't know how common it is. And really destructive things can happen when that pattern happens. I think the biggest example of that for me is that most people don't know that 1 in 2, read that as 50% of people, have had a period in their lifetime of up to 2 weeks where they seriously considered taking their own life. That number is shocking to a lot of people. A lot of people don't realize that many people have that experience. If you're a person having that experience and you don't realize it's that common, you might think there's really something wrong as opposed to you're having a pretty normal, I think 50% is pretty normal. And if we can understand that this happens to a lot of people and people have found a way to navigate it, they'll be less at risk if it's happening to them right now. I think imposter syndrome is the same way. Some of my absolute favorite people on campus have this pattern of thinking that impacts them. I really felt awesome at the faculty and staff lunch because in the room were some of my favorite people on campus, right? And they're there because they also have this. Like, you're my people, and we want to like be able to just be more open about that when we're able to. And if we can't do that in a professional big setting, we can do that with a couple of people, as Dr. Brene Brown, who's one of my teachers, says. We can share with people who have earned the right to hear our story, meaning that if I tell you this piece of my story, you're going to keep that in a safe and trusted position with you, and then I can have some people to help me work through it. You'll notice later in all of the 3 ways that I'm presenting that people have talked about formulas for breaking free from imposter syndrome, talking about it is on all 3. It is the one thing that's similar in all 3. And that's kind of weird. So we want to work together. That's what the Academic Women's Forum is really all about, building a community of caring. The 3 value statements for the Academic Women's Forum are support, connect, and empower. I look at that lady because they're her favorite words on the planet. That's what that's all been about, is creating a caring community. We want to do that as more and more people are willing to like share with people who they're working with that this is something that they struggle with doing. And then I really, like, my take on it's going to be, I'm not an academic, I'm a clinician and a resiliency trainer. So I really want folks to see how this belief structure operates. And then, as is true for many unhelpful thought habits that we get into, the way we've been taught to try to overcome it actually maintains it. Similarly to like anxiety, like the ways in which we try to make ourselves not be anxious perpetuate anxiety and exacerbate it. Similarly, you cannot make yourself fall asleep. Like, the harder you struggle with sleeplessness, the more likely you are to have insomnia. It fascinates me that insomnia impacts Americans more than people from different places. And I think that's partly because we try to like overpower insomnia. We try to like, be independent and conquer insomnia. And if you can't, you have to relax and then sleep comes to you. So I want to spend some time talking on that part of how it operates and then how do we maintain it, so we can maybe stop doing that. And to do that, I'm going to introduce some principles and skills and concepts that can help you break free from the emotional pain and the psychological confusion, because this whole like, how can I feel confident in one moment and so not confident in the next, and the way we almost gaslight ourselves in that process, and we end up with a psychological struggle to it. So you cannot win that struggle. If you're battling in your head with these 2 different voices in your head, the only way to have that shift is to withdraw your energy from it entirely in the moment. And so we're going to introduce some skills. Variety of theories intersect together. I'll show you the big blueprint today. And so those skills and the way of being with those thought habits will start to help you shop in the Imposter Syndrome thought store. I'm going to put that out there right now. There's a whole slide later that says Imposter Syndrome versus Imposter Thought Store, right? So I don't see it as a syndrome that somebody has to have for life. I see it as we came into the world. I don't believe if we went down to the Sparrow Nursery right now and could pull the tapes out of baby's head and read what's going on in their minds, I don't think anybody's feeling like they're not good enough to be in the nursery. And I don't feel like anyone's afraid that at any minute someone's going to find out they're not a good enough baby. Right? This is not something we're born with. It's not something that's, in our brain chemistry. It's a pattern of thoughts that we develop when we get messages from people in our world, both in our families and then in our communities, in our schools, from teachers, coaches, and then all the cultural messages, that we end up with a pattern of thought that tells us that we're not good enough, and at any minute people are going to find out we're not good enough, and then that creates the anxiety. So what's interesting about the skills I want to present to you guys over the next couple weeks is that it'll be helpful for the Imposter Syndrome thought store, but if you could like draw a map of your mental mall, you also shop in other thought stores that aren't helpful to your work or academic success or to your life satisfaction. We get caught up in thoughts and shop in thought stores that make us more difficult to be with in relationship. So the skill set, one of the things I love about what I was fortunate enough to learn in my own life, is the skill set can help you interrupt a lot of different things. And I often say I don't have time to do one thing at a time, and so this has been true. In fact, I would say imposter syndrome was something that wasn't even on my most pressing change list in my own psychological and emotional healing journey, in part because I didn't think it was changeable. But it's interesting that as I just learned the skills that I was learning, namely to deal with anxiety and panic, the imposter syndrome story moved away. And therefore, I was actually able to sleep last night, and I did not get physically sick just before we started, which would have happened even 10 years ago. So that's kind of what we're about in the 4 weeks of time, and I absolutely am clear that I'm just going to be scratching the surface in these few 40-minute sessions. So, big picture overview, just what is imposter syndrome? This comes from the Center for Creative Leadership. I want to note that Valerie Young is noted in their bibliography, so Valerie Young is still all over this sentence as well. The imposter syndrome is well-researched, well-documented phenomenon, I should read up here to put my glasses on, that occurs when successful and intelligent professionals feel that they do not deserve their accomplishments and that they have faked their way into success. Aren't we clever? This syndrome can cause negative stress, fear, anxiety, loss of confidence, and can eventually lead to derailment. I thought that was a good choice of words there. However, by overcoming inaccurate beliefs about yourself and your abilities, you can overcome imposter syndrome and enjoy a more fulfilling career. So some things that I noted in Dr. Young's book that I just wanted to pull out is this is the article that started this conversation, and I always feel like I want to honor these two women in their research. Dr. Young says that when somebody handed her this article, it was a life-changing thing for her. I had the same experience just a few years later when a therapist handed it to me. It's still a really important read if you haven't ever, this would be the starting point if you want to take a look at that. The study was actually 162 high-achieving women, and in that they revealed this pervasive pattern, dismissing accomplishments and believing their success would disappear, right? So the therapist that gave this to me described it as like, wow, look at Lisa, you have all these incredible accomplishments, including you're standing here with 2 degrees, and you've got all these different accomplishments. Friends of mine would joke that I was on 2 different homecoming courts, which is just funny now to talk about, but successful in a lot of different ways. But I still felt like the very next step I took was going to be in quicksand. And she said, I mean like quicksand, like sink and die. And I was like, that's exactly what it feels like. Like it's not like it's fear-inducing, it's terrorizing this. And so no matter what you've accomplished, the next step is going to be the demise that happens. And so that's that. We actually was reading a book about trauma, and they talked about internally traumatizing yourself, and that actually the chemical process of that, we can actually develop a sort of an intoxication related to that emotion. It can take us over in ways that are unseen but very traumatic. And that's, and what I would say with that is that that's my active imagination. When I meet people who struggle with anxiety and panic, I always just want to compliment them because, and I heard Valerie Young do this too, like you're really bright, smart, imaginative people. People with this, like, we're super creative and we just don't know how to not terrorize ourselves with our own imagination, which is kind of what we do. We like, how many people in the room, and I'm guessing out there in Zoom, shop in the worst case scenario store? Like are really good. Like if someone gave you a bunch of factors, could you quickly imagine the worst thing that could happen? Right? And so we have these amazing imaginations, and then we terrorize ourselves because we end up spending too much time imagining when we imagine something that comes to life in our body. And that's where the biochemical piece happens, is that if I do that to myself enough, my body knows how to do it. And the triggering of that gets faster and faster, which is why it sometimes can get worse. I appreciate this idea of the dichotomy, right? It's such a dichotomy, like that I have a public face of confidence and competence, but the private voices are, she says self-doubt. I think it's harsher than that. It's not just doubt, but sometimes self-shaming. I've been talking to people lately about thinking about their inner supervisor, like what kind of an inner supervisor do you have? I mean, we can all judge our actual supervisors or leaders or coaches, whoever, on a scale from toxic and unhelpful to, holds me lovingly accountable, firm but fair. We can kind of put them out there, but where would we put ourselves? The vast majority of people that I know that struggle with imposter syndrome would put their, if they could walk up to the continuum, they'd have to put their own name card over on the toxic side. That the way in which we supervise our own experience is really harsh and critical and shaming. And that's the structure that we have to break in order for us to have a different experience. Because here's the thing, some people would just avoid the anxiety by just not doing the thing, right? Like, because when I do public speaking, I get anxious, so I just not do public speaking. But high achieving people, we don't get that message, right? So there's these things that create that kind of anxiety, but we continue to sign up and do them. We continue to elevate our careers, so we continue to give ourselves this opportunity to have this kind of feeling. And I just want to note that I really appreciated this in the beginning of her book, that even if all of the current obstacles that women face, this particular sentence is sort of designed for women, but it could also be for anybody who's in a targeted group that's in the non-dominant group, so people of color, international students, LGBT folks. But even if all the external barriers were to disappear today, we still have this internal pattern that would keep us from asking for what we need. Matt and I just had an experience of this where we were talking about how to edit this video because it's been recording longer than we needed to. And he's like, we need to put some budget. And I'm like, I never think to ask for budget for that kind of thing, right? So like, what's the name of that book? Why Women Don't Ask, right? So, so we're trying to get at the internal part of this. So on your index card, and if you're out in Zoom and you want to do this, you could either just send a chat message or to everyone, or you can text Lydia privately. But it's just like, if you could just jot down on your card, what are some of the thoughts, what are your imposter thoughts? Like, what are the things you hear yourself say to yourself that tell you that you're an imposter? Just want to, just for a moment, think about that. One or two examples. And I'm going to collect those, so don't put your name on them. I want to like make sure that we're honoring the thoughts in the room.
Are there any extra pens or pencils? We got one back here.
Oh, you got it? Everybody? Okay. Give them up to everyone. Really the recurring ones, like, is there one that comes up a lot? Some folks might not be able to articulate that right now. It's because you've been living at the mercy of it, but not witnessing it yet. So. When you're done, if you could just raise your card. Lydia's going to come around and grab your card, and if you want a stress ball, feel free to grab one. If you want one. Unless you want stress ball.
Sure, but I can get one out. I looked through it, but I'd hit you in the face. So do this.
Okay, I'm just going to randomly read these as I sort them out. I'm not smart enough for graduate school, not capable of improvement, not experienced enough, they know more than me, don't know enough to participate, don't know enough to take that on, that no matter what you do, I won't accomplish what I set out to do. You did that wrong, you should have said or done it this way. You are really good at getting over on people. That's one of my favorites. Check me out how clever I am. I'm not good enough. I can't do that well enough. Who do you think you are? We'll talk about the flying under anything that helps you fly under the radar. Too anxious. I'll lose control. Why am I getting anxious? This makes me feel incompetent. Why can't I relax? Lots of times people feel like if they're anxious, that means they're incompetent, as opposed to I'm confident and I have anxiety, right? It's actually not linked together. One does not mean the other. I'm not prepared well enough. Expect not to do well. They look bored. They look distracted. I'm messing this up. That's always a helpful thought to have while you're in front of people. I might have that now. I'm not in the position I thought I'd be in by now. I must not be good enough. They just haven't noticed yet. I have no idea what I'm doing. Any second now. I don't have the knowledge to complete the task. I'm afraid to ask for help because they'll know I'm not smart enough. The assumption that if you don't know, you're not smart is right there, right? That is a false belief that many of us carry. You can't do that. That's way beyond your skill. What were you thinking? I don't know what I'm doing. He or she is better at that than you. I'm not as good as my peers. There's the comparative piece. One woman says comparison is the thief of happiness. I think that's a pretty accurate sentence. I need to begin a new track in my life before I'm discovered. So a lot of times people present in my office with having chronic dissatisfaction, chronic job dissatisfaction, or chronic relationship dissatisfaction. And when we really get down to do you actually like the work you do and does it have a meaning and purpose, and the answer is yes, then the dissatisfaction is actually a false dissatisfaction that just to get you out of Dodge before they find out. So sometimes people jump around in their careers quite a bit. You don't know what you're doing, you're remembering it wrong, you haven't earned it, you're not smart enough. Yeah, go ahead.
So
Say it louder.
some on Zoom is I've been lucky to get this far. There's so much you don't know. I won't be prepared enough. Your opinion or idea is dumb. Just being in the right place at the right time. Not feeling that satisfaction very long, especially if there's a success. Everyone else is better at this. They're smarter than I am. It's beyond your level. I'm not worthy of recognition because of my lack of education. So there are others as well.
So they sound a lot like some of the ones that'll be on your slide. By the way, at the very end of the class, I'll give you the slides afterwards, so the stuff that's here, you'll get it eventually as I add on to it. These are some of the kind of ideas. The success one, like, oh, I just had a success, now it's time I should go. Like this syndrome, this set of beliefs doesn't let us enjoy what we do accomplish. Because that's what this therapist was saying to me. It's like you don't get to really revel in any of the fact that you've done all this stuff because the next one's the problem, right? And so we can't even settle into the successes. We're almost like success or joy proof, right? Like we should be able to feel joy about getting that, but as soon as we get it, we're like not sure we should have it. And so we don't. It interrupts the ability to have some positive emotions too. This is the thought I'm hoping to replace that with. That these are a set of thoughts that people have, that it's not just me. So many people that I work with, I've joked for years that, oh, you have a horrible case of terrible uniqueness. Like you just think it's just you, right? Terminal uniqueness is what you say. You think it's just you and you're the only one that's doing this. But when you pull back and start to see the pattern of it, you can start to see the cultural influences that created it. You did not create this. First of all, you weren't born with it, and you did not create it on your own. A culture crafts it for us. And gender coding is very much a part of that, not just for women, but also for men. Because the gender messages that we get, for men, it sets folks up to not feel like they can ask for help. If they don't know, there's a problem with them. And with women, there's constant messages about having to make everybody happy. So perception management is a really big part of it that happens for women. So when you start to pull back and look at it, you start to see it as something bigger than you. It's a cultural framework. And then, I don't know about you, but when I recognize that I've been victimized by a cultural context that's hurting me, it's okay to get counterculture about some things. in order to like be able to be the most functional human that you can be and doing good work. So some of the markers for this, that despite success, deep down you feel like that fraud, this recurring fear of being found out or exposed, if you deflect compliments or minimize success or discount your own accomplishments. Sometimes we like to say that we're just humble, but really it's a function of insecurity. And when it's described like this, there are some genuinely humble people. That isn't, when I'm doing that, it's not so much humble as trying to get the attention away from me, because I'm afraid if they look any deeper, they'll find something else. Intense fear of failure, lack of confidence, and anxiety. This effort to present a shiny facade. I mean, I see smiles and nods, so I just know that that's true. Like, we put a lot of effort into the shiny facade. So much it exhausts us sometimes because it's way shinier than it really needs to be. And then you have to like keep the shine up. You have to like pump up the shine constantly. We end up caring more about perception than performance. That's, if that one's impacting you, then it's likely that you have a bit of perfectionism. And the thing that people don't see about perfectionism, a couple things. One is people do perfectionism to try to avoid feeling shame. Because if you can be above reproach with your shiny facade, then you don't have to feel shame. But what we don't understand is perfectionism is born out of shame. Because if you already felt good enough, you wouldn't be worried about managing everybody's perception. Imagine if you were not worried about managing everyone's perception and you actually got to bring all of your energy to your actual work, to your actual mission, to your actual purpose. We've got too many folks that spend way too much energy on perception. And I will say quite honestly, and I know it's recorded, organizationally speaking, we have a case of organizational perfectionism. We're all about the shiny. And we actually want to be less about that and more about the actual good hard work that we're doing individually, on teams, and organizationally. Because you have to overwork to maintain the facade of competency. And sometimes what's interesting is sometimes it's a facade we put up, but sometimes we think it's a facade and it's actually not. There are people who are actually pretty performance-based, but they think they're not competent. So they're still maintaining a facade that they don't even need to maintain, if that makes sense. And then often, and this is like the part that really impacts the people in your life, this is not just impacting you. And at one of the other sessions, I don't know which because I haven't created them yet, I want to talk about how you participating in this mindset impacts other people. The reason why that's important is because while some of the folks in the room will have a hard time shedding this just for them, if they can see that it's impacting other people, they might be more inclined to do the work to break it. So we'll give you that just because I want to break it. What I would love is for all of us to be free of this set of beliefs. I do want to note that because I feel like emotional wellness consultants and counselors can be dangerous if we only talk about things at the personal and interpersonal level, which is where most counselors, like if we're just talking about stress reduction and stress management, and we're only talking about your personal stress, you can get the idea that you're just not handling your stress well, but we have to look at it on all four levels because the institutional and cultural influences, like I was just saying, have to be taken into consideration. And so it's like there's some cases where you're struggling to feel good enough because you actually lack resources because of some identity that you have. So I just want to make sure that you are thinking that there's causes from all four of these levels that go into why we develop this mindset. And to break free, we need to kind of look at those different levels too. So that'll be incorporated in what I'm talking about. Mostly, I want you to see imposter syndrome as a shame story. And so I come at this from a shame resilience educator. I teach some classes on understanding shame and developing shame resilience. The model that Dr. Brown created about how to actually get more comfortable with that feeling and be able to process it is super useful, and I'm going to be introducing that and encouraging you to do some more reading about that. Shame is an emotion that's a chronic fear of rejection. If you feel shame, which this imposter syndrome thing is just an expression of really, that actually means you're a healthy person. And it's a gross, heavy emotion that we don't want to talk about, but it's important that we do, because when we talk about shame, it dissipates, but when we hide and hold shame, it festers. Sometimes it festers lathers up into imposter syndrome. And so shame is a relational emotion that we get it when we're afraid of being rejected from the group. So the not good enough is often connected to, am I going to be kicked out? So this feeling of being unworthy of love and belonging is something that we want to be able to release in our life. So while I am much more shame resilient than I used to be, I will never be shame free, and that's okay, because it's okay for me to sort of want to be aware of my relationships. If you do not have shame, I do not want to know you, because you do not care about relationship at all, and therefore I am not safe with you. So it's not whether or not we have shame, and the research indicates that shame, all genders experience shame. The messages that trigger shame can be very gender-based, either because you are trying to live up to idealized gender roles, or because, like for myself, I'm non-conforming in many ways in terms of being a woman. And so sometimes the shame comes from not measuring up with the standard, and sometimes it comes from trying so hard to measure up the standard and not being able to ever get there. That's true across genders as well. I hope I'm not just going way too fast. Is this helpful? All right. Because with 30 people in the room and 50 people on Zoom, it doesn't get to be the kind of conversation that I kind of would want it to be if we were in a group of 10 people kind of going deep with some of this. So, I said that already. So how this works with imposter syndrome, if I could ask you you could just think about this over the course of the week maybe, is if I were to ask you in terms of the areas where you tend to feel this imposter syndrome, if you were to make a list of all the ways you want to be seen in that role, and then the ways you really don't want to be seen. I think that this imposter syndrome feeling gets triggered because it's a shame. We get shame triggered. We get triggered with it whenever we feel like we're not the wanted identities, or whether we're going to show people that we are the unwanted identities. And that's when the imposter syndrome triggers. Why that's important to know that it's not just a standard syndrome you have all the time, but it's more episodic and it gets triggered and shows up in different moments, is it can actually help you start to realize what your wanted and unwanted identities are. And what I know from a lot of people is our wanted and unwanted identities are unrealistic. Or we're not willing to ever be seen as like not knowing the answer to something. So, you know, for me, there's like, well, I wouldn't be doing this class if I was feeling like I had to know everything about it, right? So sometimes not feeling like I know enough about something would make me not even try to engage in it. My fear of that unwanted identity of not knowing can get triggered. It's not the best example. I know I used to actually advocate in counseling worlds. I'm going to date myself with this word, but I used to carry a pager, and I would be on duty over the weekend, and I used to try to make an argument for pager pay because I felt like it was so stressful to carry the pager that they should actually compensate us. What I figured out later is it's not actually the pager, but it's that when I'm carrying the pager, I imagine something come up that I won't know how to deal with, and that freaks me out. So my imposter hangs out with me all weekend, sort of saying, you know, heaven forbid it goes off, like the first thing that goes, I'm not going to know, I don't even know what it is yet, right? And so this idea that a counselor needs to know, one of the major shifts in my life was I went from my job is to know to my job is to be there, to show up, and to care, and to do the best I can to find information as people need it. I mean, how could I possibly know everything about every mental health or issue under the sun, work or otherwise, for every MSU employee and their spouse and partner and their benefits eligible kids who could be having anything go on, right? But if my imposter syndrome gets activated whenever I don't know something, every time I meet a new client, I used to do that. I used to meet a new client, I'd be walking them down the hallway, talking about the weather, and in my head was like, oh, it says on their form that they're coming here for this. I don't know enough of that. Who's here that knows something about this? Well, Jenny's still here, so maybe she could know something like this. Oh, she already went home. She's on vacation. Oh my gosh, she's not here. I'm all by myself. I don't know enough. Like, okay, I'm sure your therapist doesn't do that. have at some point, right? And so now when I meet somebody, I'm just curious about meeting them. Like I'm relaxed, I'm grounded, I'm connected to my health and well-being, and I'm curious about how the conversation will go. There's a really good chance they're gonna bring something up I don't know anything about. And I will try to do my best to find out the resources or whatever's happening, but I'm calmer in it. Therefore, more present. Therefore, by the way, their session gets to be about them and not about me, right? How does that impact us with parenting? We're worried about how people are thinking about us rather than the fact that our kid's crying because something's going on, right? We get so these unwanted and wanted identities, I think, are a part of it. And so far, I haven't seen it in any of the imposter syndrome literature that I've read. So that's what you're going to get from the shame resilience coach here. Developing it, shame resilience is one way to break it. And what I want you to just start to notice, because we're going to be talking about witnessing the imposter. That's what I think I just decided next session is going to be titled. Because the starting point of breaking free is starting to notice when and how it shows up and where it shows up. And so instead of being, when it shows up, so startled by it that you're believing it, now you want to start to catch on to it. You want to start to, like with the curious eye of a camera or with the curiosity of a scientist, you want to start to notice when you start talking to yourself like that. Because you don't talk to yourself like that all the time. It gets activated. So that's one thing we'll be talking about. The other thing I really want to be clear is it's absolutely a form of anxiety. And so when we are doing something new or risky, we feel it. To avoid it, we may avoid the new or risky things. I already said this too. High achieving people miss that memo, so we keep dragging the anxiety with us. And what would it be like? I mean, I wish I could redo my grad school because I think my imposter syndrome was active the entire time I was there. I still, aced the program. I still have the degree. I don't know a lot of what they were talking about. Like I was so activated that it didn't actually get in, nor did I have a connection to it. So most of what I find most helpful that I teach people I learned after that year of imposter syndrome. We drag through. We want to be able to do that without dragging it. The energy it takes to drag all of that with us through all of our experiences, it's exhausting. Graduate students often say they're exhausted, but not physically. Well, as that's one of the things that shows up on the survey over and over and over. They're exhausted, but not physically. What does that mean? It means they're dragging this unnecessarily with them. We want to be able to try to break out of that. So I want you to start noticing that you are terrorizing yourself with your own imagination. And until we catch on to the fact that that's happening, we won't be able to interrupt it. So we think our anxiety is about the circumstances. This is the other piece I'm going to talk about next time, is like how do human beings create their moment-to-moment experience of reality? We're going to go really big picture next week and start to talk about how we create it, because we think the circumstances, like we think public speaking does it, or we think that this dissertation proposal is actually creating it. But this is a presentation that I'm doing, and I've had lots of different experiences of doing this presentation. One is like feeling so value guided that it was so essential to like have something to follow up with people. These guys are both of these guys have heard multiple versions of these. And then what the hell was I thinking? I don't have time to prepare adequately. I'm going to look like a fool. They've both heard that one. Lydia, very helpful with that. So when you start to get that it's not the circumstance, then you start to see how you operate, you can navigate different. So those are the two things we're going to, the witnessing and then the how do we operate and how do we do that. The other thing I'm sure is happening for people who have imposter syndrome is they're overusing, even abusing your analytical thinking. If I were to say, do you spend more time in a reflective, open, curious, wondering state of mind? Or do you spend most of your waking moments processing, analyzing, computing, calculating? Who spends more time in the latter of them? Like your computer mode is on most of the time. All right, it's almost everybody in the room. I often say that we could probably boil the DSM manual for diagnosing mental health problems down to one diagnosis. I actually think we're suffering from reflection deficit disorder. Like we spend so much time processing that we are in a receiving and open mode. And that's definitely true for folks that are experiencing this. And we're constantly on the lookout for threats. And the problem with that is that our sensor for noticing threats gets oversensitive. And so we see threats everywhere. And there's a really great book, if you're wanting to take a look at that, called Don't Feed the Monkey Mind. It's like the newest book I'm reading, so of course I have to say it to everybody. But this idea that there's a part of our brain that you could call the monkey mind that gets activated whenever there's a threat. In that book, the 3 threats that they say are the perceived threats that kick the monkey off and start monkey chattering. And I actually see imposter syndrome thinking as just a bunch of monkey chatter. It's not a truth about yourself. It's what your monkey tells you when your monkey's freaked out. Does that make sense? Am I really talking about the monkey in front of a bunch of people? I am. Here's the 3 threats that tend to kick the monkey off. Whenever you're not 100% certain. Okay, so I can't imagine much in the academic world that you know, there's a lot of certain, like, will they accept this proposal? When I defend, will I be successful with my defense? I mean, big, small, all along the way, there's a million pieces of it that we're not certain. And then possibly making a mistake, because our monkey doesn't like that. And whenever you're feeling over-responsible for something or someone, and so that could be a project or a grant or a research or your dissertation, or it could be a person. So how often do we get when one of those 3 things isn't happening? And to be successful in this arena, we have to be able to have those things happening and stay calm. And to know that our worth and our dignity and our humanity is not connected to whether or not something is certain or we've made a mistake, and we have to feel less responsible for things. Is it making sense? Okay. So I know I just have a moment left, not even. We'll talk about that more later. I'm skipping that. There are formulas for breaking free from this. I don't want you to leave heavy. I just needed to make sure we were kind of all on the same page moving forward. This is from the Center for Creative Leadership. What you'll note, what I would say about that is focusing on the facts. Like this method, while there's pieces of it that are helpful, if I was going to create like a holistic plan for how to deal with imposter syndrome, pieces of that would be on there. It does have the potential to set you up to struggle with your thinking. It is based on cognitive behavioral therapy in the 2nd generation of that very helpful therapy. But where the 2nd generation and the 3rd generation shifts is in the 2nd generation, people tend to get stuck struggling with their thinking. This is one that the formula that Valerie Young, to talk about it, normalize it, contextualize it, and reframe it. Also very helpful pieces we'll pull out of there. It's also 2nd generation focused. So in addition to that, I want to help you guys think of it. I've already said that. I'm going to skip through this. This slide is really about how important it is whenever you have something happening with shame. Shame is that stuff in the petri dish. If you douse it with judgment, secrecy, and silence, you go down on the column and you're going to get that kind of shame. If you bring empathy to it, it tends to dissipate. And the reason I put that slide there is that absolutely the talk about it is in all 3 of them. In the shame resilience model, there's 4 elements of navigating shame. First, you have to recognize it, which is why we're going to start with noticing and witnessing when this gets activated. You recognize that you've been taken over by the imposter, practicing critical awareness, which does link to the other pieces, reaching out and connecting with people, and then actually starting to speak it so that the community, so that you get less shame triggered by the fact that you have those thoughts, and then the community grows around it. That part still isn't getting to the other piece, which is how do we return to who we were before that got activated. I would like for you to really get connected to your health and well-being, out of which you have a moment of imposter syndrome. And when you notice that and release it, you can return back to your steady, calm, creative, wise, grounded, beautiful self. Like how all those words just flew out at you. So we're going to be talking about that part too. Because with resilience training, you get to hang out in your health and well-being. I get to actually be in front of you and however many people are out there. And can you feel that I'm connected to my health and well-being right now? And I'm bringing that to you in a way that makes sense, and I didn't do it perfectly, and I'm running out of time. I'm over time, actually. So, we're going to go big picture here and connect you to some resiliency training that's already happening on campus. There are classes related to all these different pieces of of learning how to be more emotionally resilient and psychologically flexible. My thought about that when I was talking to myself about this training is that it reminded me of the don't break the ice game. Like, instead of trying to get the thinking and just take it, just go right after the thinking of that's the imposter in the middle, the little red dude. We just want to knock away different habits that we have, and then it would fall away. Because this is, I found this image, I'm like, oh, that just sort of sums up. That's our imposter hanging out, doesn't feel good, right? And so we're going to just change the way it's structured so that it just kind of falls away, right? Because you can't go after it, because that's not how it works. But as you develop other skills and you learn to back up and interrupt it, if you get that that's not you, it's just a thought you're having, if we go at that way, it's going to change. And I think I'll leave it there, except to offer that in the meantime, in this week, if you have a moment when you are really overwhelmed with that feeling, I would like you just to acknowledge that you're having the feeling, care for yourself, honor yourself, to say, wow, you're having an imposter moment, that sucks. It's hard, it's not everything, it'll pass. And then you want to actually allow it to move out of your body. How you can do that is by bringing your attention to the present moment, taking in the present moment, taking a breath, so that you can relax back into your health, reflect on what the next best thing to do is, and do whatever that is. And we'll talk more about that structure as a way to move through any imposter moment that you have, okay? Thanks for staying a few minutes later. Thanks to you in Zoom as well. We'll be back. We are recording this so that if you missed something, then you can still get it. We just don't exactly know how we're going to do that yet, but we hope to figure that out this week. Take care. If you have questions or thoughts or comments, you can come talk to me now, or you can send me an email. Love to hear from you. How are you? How are you? Nice to see you. Oh, yes. I'm running one meeting to another meeting. Are you back across the room? Yeah. On this side. Okay. I'll walk with you for a minute. Sure. That's good. Yes, because that's sorry doesn't need to be recorded. We'll just edit that right out there.